ではこれより
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We will now start session 4. The title of the session is A Way of Producing and Using Clean LNG. This session will be moderated by Dr. Feridan Fischeraki, the chairman of FACT Global Energy. Panelists are from CCS Plus Initiative, Mr. Pascal Siegwart, from Cheniere, Executive Vice President and Chief Commercial Officer, Mr. Anatol Fagin, from Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, Senior Executive Fellow, Mr. Fukuizumi Yasushi, from NYK Line, Executive Officer, Mr. Nakamura Toshi, from OGCI Climate Investment, Business Development Manager, Mr. Will Schimmer, and from Santos, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Kevin Gallagher. Toward the end of the session, the panelists will share with the audience the keywords of their choice. Dr. Fischeraki, please.
Where you are. I am very honored to be moderating this panel of the Consumer Producer Conference. The title of the panel is The Way of Producing and Using Clean LNG. I'll take 2-3 minutes to make some introductory remarks. We all know that natural gas LNG is a transition fuel. We've known this for a while, but now we are tasked with not only having a transition fuel, but a transition fuel which is clean. The environment around us, the market demands from us, and it's our job to try and see how we can make it more effectively clean and less harmful to the environment. Now, there are people who think that LNG has a limited growth potential. I certainly think that we have a good 30-40 years of growth in front of us before we have a flat demand, at least until the late 2040s. This is going to be a long process. And in this long process, producing clean LNG becomes more and more important. We have different paths of how to get there. We have CCU and CCUS. So we also have the new and more topical methods of carbon neutral LNG by planting trees and getting carbon credits. All of these things are needed. We need them all. Obviously, some of them come faster than the other ones. We can have the carbon neutral LNG right now today. To build CCU, it takes some time. There are so much efforts going on around the world, and we are going to get there. We need to jointly make sure that LNG has a good name, a clean name. It used to have a clean name. It's become now subject to challenge, and we want to gain back that clean name and making it be acceptable, environmentally acceptable, and economically acceptable to everyone. So clean LNG is very important to us, and we need to make the transition stage and clean LNG intertwined as one and combined activity. Now, we have a very distinguished panel of speakers today. Some of them I've known for many years. We have strictly 7 minutes for each speaker. So please try to confine yourself to the limited time. And I'm going to start with Anatol as my warm-up question to start you up. There's been so much discussion in recently from Cheniere about the initiatives that you're taking and that the very dramatic plans that you have for cleaning up LNG. If you could please explain to us what they are and what your target and plans are. Anatol?
Greetings. Thank you, Dr. Fischeraki. Thank you for having us. It's an honor for Cheniere to be part of this 10th Producer Consumer Conference. And we certainly agree with you that it is our job to meet all of these conditions and requirements. LNG has an important role to play in helping Asia achieve its climate targets. It can do that by reducing greenhouse gas emissions now through the displacement of less clean burning fuels, by enabling growth in renewables, by providing a solution to intermittency issues, as a platform for the development of future low-carbon fuels such as hydrogen, ammonia, syngases, and of course natural gas with carbon capture and storage. LNG has already provided a good solution to Asia's growing energy demand since the late 1960s as a dependable and cleaner burning fuel. We believe that Cheniere's U.S. LNG can continue to fulfill that role, providing price stability, supply flexibility to Asian markets for decades to come, allowing markets to plan effectively, manage uncertainty, and minimize volatility. But as Dr. Fesharaki said, LNG must also reduce its own emissions intensity to the greatest extent possible. And that is why we are focused on improving the quantification, measurement, reporting, and verification, or QMRV, of greenhouse gas emissions in the LNG supply chain. Accurately measuring and understanding emissions is a key step to taking better informed decisions. Whether the decision maker is a supplier assessing how to best reduce emissions, a customer comparing different supply options, or policymakers looking for the best quality data on which to base long-term fuel planning decisions. Indeed, we believe that reliable tools and data for estimating GHG emissions for supplier-specific LNG supply chains are critical to boosting confidence in climate-driven policy decisions and re-earning that clean LNG name that Dr. Fesharaki says we have to embark on. In February of this year, we announced a major initiative to improve the emissions transparency of our LNG for our customers, our Cargo Emission Tags, or CE Tag system. Starting next year, we'll provide all of our customers with an estimate of the GHG emissions from production to the delivery point associated with each LNG cargo produced at our facilities. In May of this year, we announced our participation in the first study of its type to directly measure GHG emissions from an LNG carrier. Several academic institutions were involved in the study, which was undertaken by the Collaboratory to Advance Methane Science, or CAMS, a research consortium we co-founded in 2018 and includes a scientific advisory board. Measurements were made on a vessel that loaded a cargo at our Corpus Christi facility and delivered that cargo to a terminal in Europe. Then in June, we announced a collaboration with 5 domestic natural gas producers and several leading academic institutions to implement said QMRV protocols on greenhouse gas emissions performance at natural gas production sites in the US. This initiative with the natural gas producers is intended to improve the overall understanding of upstream GHG emissions and further the deployment of advanced monitoring technologies and protocols. This collaborative QMRV research and development effort will also support Cheniere's climate strategy initiatives, including that CE Tags program. Then in August, we published our first of its kind peer-reviewed LNG life cycle assessment in a scientific paper published by the American Chemical Society's Sustainable Energy Chemistry and Engineering Journal. The paper highlights the important role that life cycle assessments can have in improving GHG emissions estimates. Too much of the data to date have been estimated rather than measured, and have been generic rather than supply chain specific. It was also very important to us that the science behind the paper should be robust, peer-reviewed by the scientific community, and of a quality that could be published in such a scientific journal. I focused our recent QMRV efforts in this statement, but I'm pleased to also announce that we've managed to reduce the Scope 1 GHG emissions intensity of our LNG over the 5.5 years that we've been operating through improved operations and technical choices within our facilities. So while we've been making progress on the science and measurement of GHG emissions across the LNG value chain, we've also been taking actions to reduce them as well. I'd like to thank you for your attention to this short comment, and I look forward to discussing the areas covered in more detail in the Q&A session, along with the fellow panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anatol. We appreciate very much your explanation of not only the reduction of the GHG emission, but also the accountability to have the accounting of what is being provided in the market. That really, I think, is going to be a faster way of catching up than I think anything else, that we tell everybody what we present, and they can come up with offsets if they want to, and they can take care of it. But without that accountability and without accounting, that would be a very, very difficult task. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Second panelist is Kevin Gallagher of Santos. Kevin, the Australian initiative to produce much cleaner LNG are essential to the LNG imports in the Asian market and particularly the Japanese market. We've heard a lot about the Santos' significant announcement in the recent months. Would you introduce Santos's efforts to produce much cleaner LNG? Kevin?
Thank you, Dr. Fisharaki, and I guess I'll say hello from Adelaide here in Australia. It's good to join you this evening, and I'd also like to congratulate everyone involved with the conference on what I believe is your 10th anniversary. It's a pleasure also to join my fellow panel members to discuss this very important topic, a topic that I believe will shape our industry for the coming decades. Just as LNG has significantly contributed to emission reduction in the past, zero emission LNG or hydrogen in the future will play a critical role in achieving our future climate goals. We know that without coal to gas switching in China and the US, global greenhouse gas emissions would have been 15% higher in 2018 alone. If we take Australia's LNG capacity of 85 million tonnes and use it to replace coal in Asia, then that is an emissions saving of 300 million tonnes of CO2 per year, or 3 times Australia's Paris target each and every year. These are pretty phenomenal numbers, but the next step to change to zero emissions or carbon neutral LNG and in the future hydrogen is where I believe we can achieve really large scale emissions reduction. Australia and Japan will be key partners through this transition, just as we were in the establishment of the LNG industry in Australia back in the 1980s. That partnership continues, particularly for Santos and our Barossa LNG project offshore Northern Territory. JERA are a trusted partner and hopefully will soon be a partner in the Barossa project. And we've also finalised a supply and purchase agreement with Diamond Gas International, a wholly owned subsidiary of Mitsubishi Corporation. We took final investment decision on our Barossa project earlier this year, with first gas expected in the first half of 2025. In terms of clean LNG, it was great to see the Australian and Japanese governments sign a partnership earlier this year to work together to decarbonise through the use of technology. It was particularly encouraging to see the minister's reference to make low and zero emissions technologies that will underpin decarbonisation strategies to make them globally scalable and commercially viable. We see this global movement and the energy transition as a huge opportunity, both for Australia, but particularly for my company, Santos. The energy transition provides the opportunity for Santos to establish a new large-scale industry producing carbon offsets that will be in heavy demand from countries that lack some of the competitive advantages that we have here in Australia in carbon storage. I believe that Australia can become a carbon storage superpower based on our vast tracts of pastoral and cropping land and our depleted oil and gas reservoirs. At Santos, our plan to realise this potential is through our 3-hub CCS strategy. We have committed to and announced a credible and most importantly fundable pathway to achieve net zero Scope 1 and 2 emissions by 2040. Critical on our pathway to net zero emissions will be the successful rollout of this CCS strategy. The first of our CCS project is at Moomba in the South Australian outback. Our Moomba CCS project has already attracted strong interest from Japanese customers and investors, including the potential for zero emissions hydrogen made from natural gas. Our Moomba CCS project will safely and permanently store 1.7 million tonnes of carbon dioxide per year in the same reservoirs that held oil and gas in place for tens of millions of years. However, the potential for storage at Moomba is up to 20 million tonnes of CO2 per year for over 50 years. We are expected to take a final investment decision on the Moomba project by the end of this year, and all of the technical and commercial milestones have been achieved, and the only thing we're waiting on now is for the project to qualify for Australian carbon credit units. This critical government support is expected to be finalised this month and will clear the path for us to take FID shortly afterwards. Moomba will be the first project to hit the go button, but I'm especially excited about the potential we have to repurpose Bayu-Undan as a CCS hub for that region. We have recently signed an MOU with the Timor-Leste ANPM to progress CCS at Bayu-Undan, and we estimate a storage capacity of around 10 million tonnes of CO2 per annum at Bayu-Undan once production from this field ceases. Our studies indicate existing wells and pipeline can be repurposed for the CO2 service. And it's worth remembering that at Bayu-Undan project startup, over 1 BCF of gas per day was injected into these high permeability reservoirs. So they are some of the best offshore reservoirs in the region for gas injection. Bayu-Undan CCS potentially provides a solution for Barossa reservoir emissions from project startup and opens up resource opportunities across Northern Australia. The third hub of our strategy is offshore Western Australia, which is still very early days, but which we are now really turning our mind to. We're very excited about this strategy, and as I flagged, I do believe it provides a real opportunity, not just to start a new industry here in Australia, but I think it enables so many resources to be developed that are close to Asia. The interest in our projects is strong, and I believe we are well on the path to producing zero emissions hydrogen further down the line to accelerate our plans to decarbonise globally. So I thank you again for your time this evening, and I'll look forward to the discussion to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. This is a very extensive list that you provided with us. Far cry from 4 or 5 years ago when these issues were not even discussed. Now, all of them are in a queue, and so many of them are going to happen either parallel or one after the other. Thank you very much for your comments. Our next speaker is Mr. Will Schimmer from OGCI Climate Investment. And of course, increasingly important for companies in the LNG-related business to share and gather knowledge and expertise to address environmental issues. OGCI has carried out unique activities from overcoming technical challenges to investment in starting ventures. So could you please share with us your strategy and your plans and the direction that you're going?
And thank you for inviting me to speak today. And I know we did have a speaker substitution. So OGCI, I think this audience may be familiar with us, but OGCI is a consortium of 11 and now 12 of the largest oil and gas majors in the world to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And out of this consortium came a fund, Climate Investments. So I represent Climate Investments, which is an impact fund. So we are making impact investments to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions across, various industrial sectors. What's really interesting about LNG is there's just tremendous opportunity, I would say. When we look at the pillars of investments we make, there's basically 3 categories. And number 1 is on methane reduction. And methane reduction is really what we look at as the very easy or low-hanging fruit in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And this means really reducing methane leakage across the upstream and the midstream portion of the value chains, reducing flaring. And OGCI Climate Investments has already to date made a number of investments around monitoring and collection of data, particularly looking at the upstream and midstream. And then, with the slides, don't worry about using the slides today. I will just speak, be consistent, so thank you. But these investments have been commercial investments, so investing in companies with technologies that are already at a commercial scale that can be deployed not just in the OGCI member companies, but broadly across industry. And so we feel the methane reduction side is really critical to LNG also because of the impact it has in terms of the life cycle emissions. The second area is CCUS or CCS, and that's obviously carbon capture, utilization, storage. CCUS has a tremendous fit, I would say, with the LNG liquefaction process because of the concentration of CO2 that's emitted from these LNG, or I should say the volume of CO2 that's emitted from these LNG liquefaction facilities, from both the processing of the gas and also the combustion or the energy that's needed primarily to drive the compression of that process. You know, the amounts of CO2 that can be captured, stored, and utilized from any one, commercial scale LNG facility is in excess of millions of tons of CO2 per year. And we feel like it's a very economic situation, particularly for what we would call greenfield or new LNG facilities that are pre-FID, so in the development phase. And I will talk about one investment we have made as a case study. So that's the second area of investments we made. And then the third area, which translates well to the industry, is on energy efficiency and looking how you can, drive energy efficiency across the value chain. And so when we look across the LNG value chain, from the upstream all the way to the burner tip, there is so much opportunity for commercial investments across that value chain, whether you're talking about the shipping, whether you are talking about the LNG facility itself, or as I've mentioned, in the upstream and midstream. So we think energy efficiency across LNG value chain, there's also just, again, tremendous opportunity to decarbonize because of all, the complexity of the value chain and the fact that there are emissions occurring, at each point in time. So to date, I just want to share with you as an impact investor, and I would say our perspective is maybe a bit different than the other panelist members, which is good. How we look at investments, and really we are looking again at commercial investments, so not as much R&D, but in both venture technology investments that are set to scale or kind of the growth equity phase. And I can mention companies like Aerospace, GHG Sat, Andium. These are three investments we've made, within the climate investments organization, which are firmly focused on, methane reduction in the upstream and the midstream. So we feel like, again, there's tremendous commercial opportunity, not just R&D or government funded, but really business opportunity to drive these methane emissions down. Secondly, within the CCS area, I wanted to talk a bit about next decade today, because I think that's the most relevant investment we've made. That investment, OGCI Climate Investments, decided to make an investment in development of the next decade facility in South Texas, because we believe that facility has the potential to be industry leading in terms of the carbon footprint. The facility is greenfield, meaning it's still in development. It's set to reach FID late this year. And because the facility is still in an engineering phase, the ability to design the carbon capture to link up with the liquefaction really makes a lot of commercial sense, because there are efficiencies of scale and engineering that can be achieved by designing both liquefaction and the carbon capture, all at once, and building the facility all at once. And what's unique about this facility, and I would say the management team, is, they're looking to actually deploy carbon capture at the same time as the liquefaction. And it will be a trained approach with one train of capture per one train of liquefaction. So really a nice, what we call modular, but modular built from a large scale EPC perspective approach to the capture portion. So we really like that engineering and business approach of staging the carbon capture. The other areas we felt, and why we made the investment, was because we felt the CCS and the need to decarbonize the asset initially was essential for the project to be successful. So in working with the management team, we felt that carbon capture was really a key pillar of their strategy, not just marketing, and the fact that the carbon capture would be deployed in sync with the liquefaction, meaning we would achieve impact immediately, meaning reduction in CO2 equivalent emissions. And these impact metrics could be, in excess of 1 million tons of CO2 reduced via the carbon capture process per train. So depending on how many trains are built, you could reach a total in excess of 5 million tons per year of CO2, which would make this the largest carbon capture facility in the world and a commercial facility at that. So that was also very interesting for us, from a strategy basis. And the third area third reason we made the investment was because of the focus on, I would say, the full value chain. Meaning we all understand, particularly from US gas, there's a lot of opportunity in the upstream and the midstream to drive down greenhouse gas equivalent emissions, mainly in terms of the methane reduction. And the fact that this management team was focused on working with very responsible upstream and midstream companies who were focused on either reducing flaring or achieving minimal to no flaring, while also reducing the methane leakage. And the term that's been used, at least in the US to some extent, is responsibly sourced natural gas. And I think for the industry as a whole, there are a number of very responsible actors in the industry that are looking to reduce flaring and leakage and are setting very aggressive metrics. And there are other participants that may need to be pushed to do that. And we felt the investment in NextDecade was an investment, in a team that was going to work with these upstream suppliers to further reduce the methane emissions, because the methane emissions are really a critical piece of the full value chain emissions for the US Gulf Coast source gas. And I think we all understand that the focus on that. So in summary, I would say I think the opportunity for decarbonization in LNG is tremendous. I think this decade is such an exciting time to be in the industry. And when I look at the panelist members here, I know how much focus decarbonization is getting in the industry and how it's becoming an important part for the buyers. And the last thing I would like to leave you with is, decarbonization of physical assets like LNG will produce, verifiable reduction in emissions or carbon credits, that are verifiable with physical assets. And I do think there is value, from the buyer's perspective, and actually be able to go and visit an asset and say that asset, captures and stores 1 million tons per year. And it's very auditable. The information is real. And so I think having these physical carbon credits that you can point to, I do think there's going to be a market for that in the future. And I would like to say, the consortium here with METI and buyers in Japan have been a leader in terms of looking at lower carbon fuel sources. And I think the leadership is also very much appreciated. So thank you very much for the time to speak today. And I look forward to listening to the other panel members.
Thank you very much, Will, for your very exciting comments and the comments about how you can make the decarbonization commercial and how likely is that the economics of it would work. This, I think, is music to the ears of all the people who are interested in creating a clean LNG and making it pay for itself rather than bankrolling it from their own money. So thank you very much. That was very helpful. Next speaker is Mr. Pascal Sigwart, VP Carbon Markets and Economy, Total CCS Plus initiative. We know CCS is great, but CCS Plus must be very exciting. All eyes are on the new initiatives in the LNG markets like yours. CCS and credits, as well as how to treat them, should be the key in cleaning up the LNG value chain. Please share with us your plans and your views.
Good, Doctor. If you could put the slides. Will gave me a very good transition. Thank you, Will. And so I'm VP Carbon Energy from Total Energies, the company that changed name. And we have launched or co-launched with several other companies an initiative which is called CCS Plus, which I will present to you. If you want to put the slides, it will help the audience to understand. So the initiative is to pull the industry together to try to leverage carbon markets to support investment in CCS and to accelerate deployment in CCS, including the LNG. If you go to the next slide. So here we are speaking about all the type of CCS. I will detail a little bit. And we have, like for LNG, avoided emissions opportunities, but we have to think that CCS is also having opportunities for carbon removal, technological carbon removals, and that's also a very great opportunities. Today for CCS, there is no methodologies which is available for counting. So there are under developments now in Australia and in Belgium, but it's still the starting. And to unlock the CCS framework in the carbon market, like in voluntary carbon market and tomorrow in the Article 6 carbon markets, we really need to have a high integrity and high level of confidence that the methodologies are very well robust, including life cycle analysis. So this is a collaborative approach with the CCS Plus initiative to build these building blocks for these methodologies. If you go to the next slide. Here we show you the work plan that we have a modular approach. So you see the approach main related to the source of CO2 and the way to capture it. Of course, you have the LNG plants, which are producing a native CO2, or also to the liquefactions, which are source of CO2. They are fossil source of CO2. At the end game, you have also CO2 from the combustions, usually combustion from fossil fuels, but it could be also combustion for biomass. And here you go from BECCS type of technologies or bio-CCS. You could imagine CO2 to be captured also in an ethanol plant for fermentations, and then also from a biogas plant, or at the end when you burn the biogas. So this is what we call biogenic CO2. So here the CO2 is taken from the atmosphere. That's why we can claim carbon removals. And you can have also direct air capture, which is taking the CO2 from the air. So a lot of different type of sources, which enable us to develop different type of modules. Then you need to transport the CO2, and here there are also different ways. You do it by pipeline. In Europe, we have to do it offshore storage, so you need to have barge and boats. Could be by truck or by rail. And the storage side can be also with different type of solutions. You can store in aquifers, in depleted oil and gas fields, but also in balsamic formations. You can think about EORs, which is a specific approach that we have to be very careful on that. But you could have also dispersed mineralization, long-term also usage of the CO2, or short-term, where you have to be careful with the life cycle analysis. Together with this modular approach, we have to also develop very strict relationship with the regulation around the CO2 and the capture and the CCS. So that's why we have these complementary tool sets to put the link with the UETS or the ETS, with Article 6, with domestic regulations, with voluntary carbon markets, and Article 6. We go to the next slide. The carbon mechanisms is a project-based approach. So you have project owners, which could be companies which are involved in the CCS from the capture side, also the storage side, the transport side, but you create a value chain because you need from the capture to the storage. So it's not only one actors, but a project which will be able to claim the emission reductions. The emission reduction are calculated through a baseline approach where you need to deduct the project emissions, eventually leakage. And what the methodology is there to is really to be able to measure all the information that you need to calculate very precisely this baseline emission and the project emissions. This is very important to have high integrity about your calculation. And of course, this has to be done differently for each modules. One of the conditions to get carbon credits is to have also projects additionality. So meaning that is not a regulatory obligation to do the CCS project, or that the CCS project is not, let's say, financed by other means. If you go to the next slide, I will not go in much details, but just for you to understand that it is a very structured approach when you go to carbon mechanisms. The project has to be described in the document, which has to be audited and validated through external auditors and the standards. This is called registration. And then over time, all the data needs to be gathered according to the monitoring plan. And again, you will do every, for instance, year, the check of the data by an independent verification with an auditor. And then only you can claim when the emission reduction has been achieved over a period of time on a regular basis, the carbon credits under the framework or the standard that we have chosen. Go to the next page. Here to show you the members of the CCS initiative. So we have started only several months ago. The founders were Total Energies, Northern Lights. We were also joined by Oxy and with Oxylocarbon and Carbon Finance Labs. We have now also BP, Equinor. We have in discussions with other members, including Japanese oil and gas companies. And we are very happy to have all these core partners joining. Why? Because these partners will also help us to finance this initiative, but also bring all the projects, the CCS project they have in their pipe, to be able to build the methodologies and the model methodologies with real projects. So it's not something that it will be theoretical, but will be built through the expertise of the industry. And that's very important for the success of the industry. We have also partners like Fortum and Mitsubishi Corporations, which are also there. And we have startups working with us who call technology partners that you can see here. We have chosen today to work under the VERA, so the CS framework, because I would say it is a global framework, which is today the only one which is enabling us to have a global reach. We hope that we can also translate all the work until an Article 6 framework, but today it will take several years until there is an agreement, if there is an agreement for such an international framework. What was very important for us is to have a strong advisory group, because as I mentioned, we want to have a social acceptance of our initiative through very high environmental integrity. So we have best-in-class associations and professional associations, including NGOs, which are part of our initiative through an advisory group. And it's through in these groups, there are tremendous knowledge already about CCS, also how to define, and especially if we go to the removals, to the negative emissions, it's here that we have also to define a lot of concepts which are not yet completely clear. And to mention that we have also a GCI, and we're happy to have them and the advisory group. The work is done through very high experts carbon consultants, which are Perspective and South Pole, and they are the ones writing the pen and leveraging all the knowledge that we have in the industry for the core partners and the partners. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to be able to respond to your questions later on.
Thank you very much, Pascal, for a very comprehensive presentation. And although you had quite a few charts, you were able to manage them so fast and so much to the point. Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Fukuzumi-san from Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. Question to you is that the largest share of GHG emissions along the stages of clean use of LNG comes from use of turbines in thermal power. Injecting hydrogen into fuel flows and CCUS are encouraging signs of cleaner use of gas in power generation. Can you tell us about your latest initiative as far as power generation is concerned?
Yep. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for your kind introduction, Fesharaki-san. And thank you for having me over here. And I am very honored to be here to exchange opinions regarding the LNG with the distinguished panelists today. Perhaps to answer your questions, I can share that I can use my slides to share. So probably just for the recap of that, our company is known as a power generation equipment manufacturer. So let me start with some of the key parameters to represent that natural gas-based power generation energy conversion equipment. 2 meters what is these 2 meters? 2 meter is the actual length of the 4-stage turbines of that of our most advanced gas turbine product. And then this 2 meter length 4-stage turbine can produce actually 1,000 megawatt power, 1,000 megawatt power, which is equivalent to that 1 unit of the nuclear power station. And then the produced power at the turbine portion is deducted for the power consumed in the compressor, 500 megawatt, and then the output is 500 megawatt for the generator. And then the footprint of this, the gas turbine combined cycle power is just 250 meter by 140 meter. So you can easily imagine how energy density is very large for the gas turbine. And this, the power station, the gas turbine portion is just here only. This big, portion is that the air-cooled condenser for the bottoming cycle. So you can easily imagine that how that total bill of quantity is small, meaning that the gas turbine combined cycle energy, energy conversion is so efficient economically. And this picture is actually the picture of our in-house combined cycle in our Takasago facility, which now we verify that the highest efficiency in the world, 65% thermal efficiency. And then this power station will have that the hydrogen production facility just adjacent to this. And we're going to test that, the hydrogen mixture conversion in 2 years. So as I mentioned, that we are just enhancing that our power generation, equipment capability for this green portion, decarbonize existing infrastructure, such as hydrogen or mixture, or sometimes the ammonia mixture into the boiler. And in addition to that, the energy efficiency improvement. But to do that, we're gonna need to have that fuel supply chain. That's why that in the middle of this blue portion, we rather than just waiting for somebody's providing that hydrogen, we by ourselves enter into that hydrogen development project. And not only Japan, also that the US, one in US, one in Europe, and then the one in Australia. We are investing the project. We became a partial owner of the project, and then we verify our technology. And this is to configure that kind of a total supply chain ecosystem. This is going to be the challenge for us. That's why that not only by us, we want to collaborate with all the relevant business players associated with new energy supply chain. And then the orange color portion is the carbon capture and then the utilization. I would say CO2 management portion. So we are the large-scale commercialized CCS, supplier. One big unit in that Texas, in the US, has been operated in that 500 megawatt, coal power plant. We are exploring that our capability to more on the not only just power generation, also the industry side right now. Again, for that, we're going to need to work on all other relevant business players. This is also going to figure out that ecosystem with the business partners. That is a kind of a challenge for us. So in summary, our thought is this. So energy is the basis of all economic activities, yes, no doubt. And emerging countries in Southeast Asia need to have a stable and affordable energy supply for their economic growth, which is finally achieving a carbon neutral, society. if we apply the carbon neutral fuel to the existing highly efficient infrastructure, then we can economically generate the power with the existing equipment. And energy conservation and waste management should be the base. We should work on that energy conservation with the highly efficient energy conversion equipment, and then try to deploy that the carbon neutral fuel. That's our thought. And proper infrastructure and the dependable power supply are required even with the renewable expansion. The renewable energy is, of course, that we have to expand, but the renewable energy is quite unstable. And to have that compensating that such kind of fluctuation, we have to have a dependable, stable power supply, which will be a cleaner, natural gas-based, highly efficient power generation equipment. And then carbon neutral fuel development and the CO2 management are totally new energy supply management chain creation by many business players. As I mentioned, we need to collaborate with all the relevant business players. Somebody may be already existing, but somebody may be new players we have to invite. So those are the kind of challenge, but we as a partial owner, we participate to that kind of project and try to collaborate with the possible partners. And then finally, that MHI will play a role as a coordinator and a catalyst among players and the key technology provider. So we, as a nature of the technology provider and the manufacturer, that we have been investing that the technology development, and then by having that some business hypothesis by using our technology, we're going to propose to the possible partners and work together and create finally that total supply chain. That is a kind of activity we just nearly started, not just a simple equipment manufacturer. So the final, this chart is that showing that our image, how can we figure out that green or blue or sometimes turquoise supply chain. We have been investing, not only just the internal technology, but also we invest at other venture technology and try to improve their technology, and then to find out that our business allocation in the total supply chain by collaboration with the other the business players. This is the end of my presentation, and I hope that we can have that a fruitful discussion today. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Much appreciated. So many activities, and you taking shares and investments all around the world. It's very exciting to hear that. Last but not least speaker is Nakamura-san from NYK Line. You are leading shipping company in Japan and in the world. And we'd like to hear from you initiatives on LNG bunkering and to what extent they go in to try to help reach the IMO international carbon standards, both for LNG powered ships and dual powered ships, cargo carriers, crew car carriers. You share with us what is going on in this space and what are the initiatives that NYK is undertaking. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, Shark-san. And we are very honored to be here to have a discussion with distinguished guest. Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity. Okay, and today, could you put the slides on the screen? And today's short presentation start with the current situation of LNG as marine fuel. Then we will move on to the IMO's regulation and explain what IMO is now requesting and will request in the future shipping companies to comply with. Then we will explain NYK's strategy, how we are positioning LNG towards the goal of zero-emission shipping. And lastly, moving on to the financial aspect of these initiatives, especially referring to first transition bond in Japan, which we recently issued. And we will explain how we plan to use the transition bond, taking some specific examples. Okay, next. Now, on the current situation of LNG as marine fuel. First, number of LNG fuel vessels, about 200 ships are now in operation, and about 150 ships are on order and will come into the market shortly. You can see how rapidly number of LNG fuel vessels have been increasing recently. Looking at the left table, you can see NYK is ranked second number-wise of the LNG fuel vessel. This number includes on-order vessels and affiliate companies. Next. And then the world map of LNG bunkering operations. As you can see, LNG bunkering operations are being done and will be done all over the world. Currently, 17 ports are available for bunkering, and 8 more will be added shortly. And 20 LNG bunkering vessels are now in operation, and 20 more will come shortly. We would say long-lasting chicken and egg situation between demand side and supply side is over. Next. Then we would like to move on to the IMO's roadmap for zero emission. IMO's vision, International Maritime Organization's vision, is to achieve zero emission as early as possible in this century, and currently set a target of improving fuel efficiency by 40% by 2030, and of reducing GHG emission by half by 2050. What we have to pay attention to here is 2050 target setting is now under discussion for its revision. It is possible that it may be strengthened to zero emission, as Mr. John Kerry, US Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, suggested just recently. On top of that, new regulations for existing vessel in its fuel consumption will be introduced from 2023. This will urge shipping companies to replace vessels to more environmentally friendly ones like LNG fuel vessels. Next, please. Okay, considering these regulations, we NYK have a strategy of using LNG as bridging solution for future zero emission fuel like hydrogen, ammonia or synthetic methane or e-methanol, etc., for example. But we believe LNG is the most realistic option at this moment to bridge to our future vision of zero emission shipping. So we have 3 reasons why NYK consider LNG fuel as bridging solution. One is volume availability. It's abundant. Second is supply infrastructure. As I mentioned, it does exist and now expanding. Third is CO2 reduction rate. About 25% reduction is better than others. We are of opinion that LNG is better than other alternative fuel at this moment. Bottom graph shows you our image of replacement plan of NYK's pure car and truck carriers. We call it PCTC fleet. We have 100 ships, 100 PCTC ships in our fleet. We expect zero emission vessels will appear in the market within 10 years and getting popular in 2030s gradually, especially we regard ammonia fuel vessel as the most realistic candidate. But we believe LNG fuel vessel will be able to bridge the gap between now and future. Then next, please. Okay, just recently we announced a press release on ARLFV. It's an abbreviation of ammonia fuel ready LNG fuel vessel. NYK Group and our partner started to make concept design of ARLFV in order to make smooth transition from LNG fuel vessel to ammonia fuel vessel. Next, please. Okay, now it's time to move on to the financial aspects. So in 2018, we issued green bond, which was the world first in global shipping sector. Then this year, we issued Japan's first transition bond. In general, we plan to use this type of procured money not only for green projects like offshore wind, zero emission fuel vessel, but also for transition projects like LNG fuel vessels or LNG bunkering vessels. Next, please. More specifically, we will spend this time transition bond money in building a variety of LNG fuel vessels. We have already ordered 19 PCTC, 2 bulk carriers, and 1 cruise ship, which are fueled by LNG. And also, we will spend it on R&D, research and development activities for zero-emission vessels for the future. At this moment, we NYK are now working on several technological development projects relating to, as you can see here, ammonia fuel tugboat, ammonia fueled ammonia gas carrier, we call it AFAGC, and high power fuel cell vessels. We hope those projects will bring us to future zero emission shipping world. Next. Last but not the least, NYK's basic philosophy is bringing value to life. It means we must become sustainable solution provider that remains essential to society and industry. We commit ourselves to materialize greener world and to continuously stay ahead during the long journey to zero emission shipping. Thank you for your listening. And we are very looking forward to today's panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Nakamura-san. That was a very extensive presentation. I'll have some more questions on the transition bonds in a moment, but this brings the presentations to an end, and now we are going to get into a very brief Q&A session. I will ask some questions from some of you and maybe some random questions from the others. I guess the first question that I want to ask is both for Anatol and for Kevin. That's about the methane emission management. It's become a globally significant issue. Could you tell us how you plan to deal with it? First, you, Anatol.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Fisaraki, and thanks to my fellow panelists for excellent presentations. It's really remarkable how our industry overall has started to refocus on these key issues, and as Dr. Fisaraki said, to continue to ensure LNG's good and clean name, and that is what we're focused on. Over the last 3 to 4 years, there's been a lot of discussion about methane and methane leakage, and in fact, the role of unconventional hydrocarbon production in contributing to methane leakage. And that we felt for years now, and that's why, as I mentioned, we launched, amongst other things, the Collaboratory on Methane Science in 2018. We felt like the data quality was lacking, and we needed to ensure that we have good information, high quality information in a timely manner. We're blessed that the US has great transparency on GHG emissions. The data are reported on an annual basis to the government repository, and that is a great starting point. As we know, the emissions profile, at least as reported, of every compressor and producing facility. But we think that quality and timeliness of that information needs to improve, and that's why we embarked on these many QMRV type endeavors, both upstream and downstream of our facilities. So our number one goal today is to get the technology evaluated and deployed, collect that information on any given day. Cheniere buys from almost 100 different producers and transports gas on 24 or so pipeline systems, and understanding and knowing that emissions profile, whether it's CO2 or the methane, fugitive methane emissions, is critical to making the right decisions for us to commit capital, select our partners upstream and downstream of our facility, and continue to drive down the CO2e profile on a life cycle basis of our product. So that is the number one battle cry today on the emissions front, and we are squarely focused on that, as you heard in our prepared remarks. So thank you for the question. It is job one.
Thank you very much. Kevin?
Thank you, Dr. Fisher-Raki. Look, at Santos, it's a combination of many initiatives in terms of not only measuring but reducing methane emissions across all of our operations. And that starts with a rolling program of surveys across all of our operated assets here in Australia, background surveys and measurement of methane emissions and background emissions at every facility, from upstream drilling facilities to our midstream gas plants or LNG facilities. We measure all of these on a rolling basis over a 10-year period. And that gives us actual measurements. That's working with very respected institutes like the CSIRO here in Australia to get those measurements. And that helps us then to check the actual measurements versus the theoretical calculations that are required for some of the regulatory reporting of greenhouse gas emissions. And in most cases, in fact, in all cases with Santos, we see that the actual measurements are lower than the theoretical calculated fugitive emissions. And so we think that gives us great confidence that we're operating our facilities to very high standards. In addition to that, we also limit flaring across all of our operations, and we look at using gas for beneficial use as opposed to flaring where we can. Other than safety flaring and well testing from time to time, we try to limit flaring across all of those operations, and that's becoming more and more strict and stringent, if you like, with future developments. And I think thirdly, in Australia, there is just an intrinsic high transparency and regulatory reporting of all kinds of emissions. And I had Anatol say the same about the US, and I think Australia certainly benchmarks well against any country in the world in terms of the regulatory greenhouse gas emission reporting, whether that be scope 1, 2, 3, or fugitive emissions. We report them all to a very high standard of transparency. So yeah, a lot of work going on across all of our operations to manage methane. And of course, in addition to that, we hope to obviously capture a lot of greenhouse gas emissions with our multiple CCS projects over the next 5 to 7 years, both onshore and offshore here in Australia.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I have a question from Nakamura-san. You talked about the transition bonds. Can you tell us how much money are we talking about? You didn't mention anything about the sums. Are we talking about hundreds of millions or many billions, or what kind of volumes are these transition bonds?
Okay, thank you, Fisher-san. And actually, this year we issued 20 billion yen, Japanese yen, means about 200 million US dollars. So on the, I think the purpose, I think the real purpose of this issuance is we have three things as a background. So one is we set issuance as a kind of initiative to accomplish our transition strategy. So our transition strategy is also our growth strategy as well. So well, that is kind of very, very important things. Of course, we have another reason of issuance, and of course, we want to expand our fundraising resources, but everybody thinks. But more importantly, we position this issuance as more strategic one for our growth strategy. And third things, importantly, we consider this issuance to be a good opportunity to inform variety of stakeholders of NYK's groups initiatives, what we call NYK ESG story. So this is a good kind of opportunity to let them understand our growth stories. That is kind of background of this our issuance of the transition bond.
Let me ask you one more question, Nakamura-san.
Yes.
If we want to get to the 50% carbon reduction as set by IMO by 2050, can we do it all by creating LNG, or we have to use other things at the same time?
Yes, of course, the LNG will be able to reduce just 25%. So that's why, of course, we position LNG fuel vessel as a kind of transition bridging solution. So we are going to, or we have a desire to bring ammonia fuel vessel if possible, if technically possible. So we expect it will come in within 10 years. Then it will, as I explained, we are going to use such kind of a solution maybe in 2030s gradually. Then the portion of the zero emission vessel will be larger and larger. Then we will achieve our goal of 50% of the reduction. But maybe IMO's regulation will be strengthened, and maybe we have to comply with more strengthened target of maybe net zero or something. So in that cases, of course, to prepare for that, we are now expediting the R&D activities to make it happen. And also, of course, maybe in the future, synthetic methane or zero carbon LNG will come. If it comes, I think it is very, very good for us. So because the existing LNG fuel vessel will be utilized for zero emission ship. But everything depends on the future R&D developments, I think.
Thank you very much. Well, I have a question for Koizumi-san and yourself again at NYK. What is it that you like the Japanese government to do to help the process that you have started? First, from Koizumi-san, please.
Yes, we can do that, the hydrogen combustor, the development or the ammonia fuel application to the boiler. We can do that, but we have to have that affordable, the fuel supply. We need to figure out the total fuel supply chain thing. So that's going to be creating the ecosystem with the various energy players. That is a kind of difficult part for us to do that. And we quite recently announced that the participation to the one association, led by the upstream players, Chevron, Conoco in US, called the Asian Natural Gas Energy Association. That's one of the reasons why, because we, the technology provider, cannot propose to the users just by technology, but with the other players together to promote the natural gas, for example. So for that, probably we're going to need some, the government help. to have that place to discuss with the local nations, the policymakers, for example, a kind of platform of discussion of the new energy systems. That's one thing to probably ask. And the other thing is that this is going to be the creating the total new supply chain. So always the risk will be associated with that. So the risk mitigation is another factor that we may ask government to help us. The people are hesitant to do that something new always, but if there's a scheme that the government will provide some risk mitigation provision, then that the business player can probably comfortably enter into that kind of new development. So those two aspects that we directly ask that the government help.
Thank you. Nakamura-san, is there anything that you'd like the Japanese government to do?
Yes, and of course, in order to materialize, for example, ammonia bunkering, I think we need to overcome lots of regulations. And also, if we use hydrogen for the as marine fuel, of course, we need to fix, or we need to kind of decide lots of regulations. So that's why, and maybe, and also the ammonia. In case of ammonia has a toxicity. So we need to, have a lot of discussion with the regulation side to make such kind of zero emission shipping happen. So on the so it's that why, and we have been talking very closely with the Ministry of Transportation and the Infrastructure and the Transport and Tourism, MRIT, for the further technical developments and also the solution to make it happen.
Okay, thank you. I have a question that I want to ask Will and also for Pascal. The kind of processes that you explained to us, are they designed for the new LNG trains, or can it also be applied to existing LNG trains? And if you want to make the existing LNG train cleaner, how do you verify it?
It can be applied to any kind of CO2 emissions. So from the LNG, which is the existing plants or the new plants, adding a CCS capture and storage system, or the new one. So that's also applicable to any type of CO2 sources, as I mentioned. So old one and new ones.
It doesn't have to be something new.
No, the project of capture and storage has to be new, but the emissions may be existing. And usually it's faster to have, let's say, existing emissions. That's what we are targeting first. For instance, all the existing CCS plants which are today under, let's say, building it, they are using CCS stream, CO2 stream, which is already existing. Like Northern Lights, for instance, will collect. It will be the first commercial system to collect CO2 from different emitters. And what is interesting is also with our offer that we can close the loop, and we can also capture the CO2 at the end of the value chain from the downstream for the LNG users, for the hard-to-abate sectors. What is also interesting when you have a project with an LNG plant, it can start to be a hub, and you can extend, adding new capacity of storage and transport, and offer this additional capacity to the other industries. So this is also the view to transform the LNG as a CO2 capture hub.
And do you see that there is a need for a public-private initiatives combined, or is the consortium with the grouping that you have, it's sufficient?
So we are thinking and discussing with several authority institutions to have them on board the initiative, because there are interactions with regulations. today we think that the fastest way forward in many geographies are through the voluntary carbon market. So we need to have, let's say, the support also to take step this kind of piloting, because there is many things to be invented. There are other countries which are already, let's say, more advanced, like in Japan with METI, we have discussion, or JOGMEC, trying, because they are already familiar with this type of carbon credits mechanisms. And we can have bilateral agreements between Japan and a country which is producing LNG, transferring credits to Japan. That's very interesting. And METI has started to have discussion, for instance, in Malaysia, like that.
Okay, Will, do you have any comments on this same topic?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Pascal, for your answer. I do think there is opportunity to decarbonize both what we call greenfield, new assets in development, or brownfield, existing assets, particularly if we're looking at the LNG liquefaction space. Our view is, from an economic perspective, there definitely are synergies in terms of designing, the decarbonization and building that at the same time that you would build, the liquefaction asset, just because you have construction teams there, you've got engineering work underway. With that said, I do agree with Pascal, for the installed base of LNG plants, right, there's huge decarbonization potential, particularly if you look at, the byproduct CO2 gas that's produced from, the cleaning of the natural gas, basically taking the CO2 out of the feed gas before you liquefy it. And what this means is you have, a relatively pure byproduct that can be accessed and, captured at a much lower cost versus, combustion gas. So I think that's an opportunity that plays across any LNG plant that's processing, a gas with a decent amount of CO2 in the feed. But then, to Pascal's point, right, as the industry matures, and I think the repetition of the engineering and design of these capture and storage units comes to market, as long as you can overcome the issues of plot space and utilities being available, these units could be deployed, globally to help decarbonize the installed base. So I do think there's opportunity on both sides. And, we at Climate Investments are very interested in looking at funding opportunities, whether it's greenfield, brownfield, or really anywhere in the world also. It does not need to be just in the US or Europe. So I think the opportunity there is really amazing for decarbonization.
Thank you very much, Will. Now, I have a question that I want to throw to Anatole and to Kevin. How do you divide the cost between the consumer and the producer? The cost of decarbonization. Do you cover all the costs should be covered by the producer, or all the costs should be covered by the consumer? What kind of mechanism can we look at in terms of trying to make an equitable division of expenses to reach the target? Anatole, if you could please.
Thanks, Dr. Fisharaki. We've been fairly public that we expect to neither charge nor pay a premium for these moves for the foreseeable future. Again, a lot depends on the results of these efforts to measure and improve the performance of the supply chain. We are fortunate that even though I would say the life cycle analysis and climate commitments were not part of the regular lexicon of the supply chain as recently as 3 years ago, today, of our producer partners that we rely on to supply our facilities, over 3/4 have made their own climate commitments, and that number will rise both for the industry as well as for the Cheniere portfolio. And the same can be said of our infrastructure partners on the pipeline and gathering and processing side. So we're in the process now of figuring out where to place those efforts and with whom to partner on these emissions reductions, both on the methane and CO2 front. We think that those steps will be very significant. and we will deliver those achievements and those improvements as a continuous process to our customers. And those commitments will give us a seat at the table and will allow us to continue to advance our business model and continue to grow the LNG industry overall, while we work in earnest to again, as we said, maintain its good and clean name. So we think that there is a tremendous amount of opportunity to do things better, more efficiently, incorporating these climate commitments that will have dramatic improvements in the LCA for Cheniere and for US LNG, and that we do not expect to either pay or collect a premium for.
Thank you. Well, you know, for the carbon neutral LNG today in the market, the costs are 30 to 60 cents. And there's always an argument about who should pay for it. When the markets are long, the seller pays for it. When the market is tight, perhaps the buyer pays for it. Kevin, do you have any views on this issue?
Yes, and Dr. Fisharaki, I suppose I was just thinking as you were talking there, it's very much depending on whether it's a buyer's market or a seller's market, who everybody says should pay for it. But look, at the end of the day, we think it comes down to carbon credit units and how they're able to be traded across borders. And so we think the operationalization of Article 6.2 of the Paris Agreement is critical to allow investments to go cross-border. And if I think about the Australian situation here, we expect the Australian government this month to approve the regulations and legislation that supports carbon capture and storage projects to qualify for carbon credits, Australian carbon credit units, which are very highly regarded, high quality carbon credit units. And then I think it comes down to the value of the credits and the different commercial models that can be developed off the back of that. And for example, in the first instance, I would say that Santos will be very comfortable paying for all of our Scope 1 and 2 emissions in the generation of LNG. We have no concerns about that whatsoever, because with CCS, we'll be able to capture all of those reservoir emissions, all of those processing emissions, you know, as Will said earlier on, you know, our strategy is to capture them from our LNG facilities, such as Down LNG, and as a consequence of that, calculate carbon credits that will then offset all of the emissions from that process. So we can take care of our Scope 1 and 2, and depending on the value of those credits, I can see those projects being NPV positive projects and very accretive projects. You know, we're talking about the Cooper Basin, the Moomba CCS project, having a life cycle break-even carbon price of around $24 per ton. So this is one of the lowest cost carbon credit projects in the world. So today, carbon credits in Australia are trading around $25 Aussie. So it won't be long until I'd imagine that carbon price is going to be above that of the life cycle costs of that project, and hence it becomes NPV positive. So it's not, you know, and I think what that does, it unlocks all sorts of commercial models going forward, where both buyers, just as buyers today participate in taking equity in LNG projects, I can see them doing the same in the CCS projects in order to take care of what we would regard as Scope 3 emissions. So I think there'll be a lot of different commercial models being developed as it goes forward. And I think the higher carbon prices go in time, ironically, the more it's going to help the offsetting of emissions and the incentivization of the investments in those sorts of projects to offset emissions from LNG supply chains.
Okay, we are maybe have 3-4 minutes. I want to throw one question to anybody in the panel who wants to respond to, and that is, how can the LNG industry promote ideas of clean LNG in terms of public recognition? How do we beautify LNG? And how do we defend LNG against the protractors? Do we need to have higher public relation firms to do this kind of things? Or do we need to keep going to conferences and tell the conferences LNG is beautiful? Is there any mechanism that we can use to make LNG more acceptable publicly? Anybody?
Well, perhaps I'll start. When we unveiled, Cheniere unveiled our climate commitment, we based it on a couple of pillars, science and transparency being two of those, focus on supply chain, as I've discussed, being another. We, as representative of the U.S. industry, are doing our part in working with our supply chain to dramatically improve the quality of the science and the transparency. We have a decent start, again, as I mentioned, with annual disclosures, but the information needs to be much more of higher quality, much more timely, and be delivered to the world in a way that the world is comfortable with, right? And that's where the verification part comes in. Kevin mentioned that a number of times as it relates to carbon credits, and we think that that is imperative for each component of emissions along the supply chain. Once we have that quality information, we can tell a much more robust story that we certainly believe in, but have not done as good a job as an industry as we should have historically to be able to support those claims and again affirm the relative advantages and cleanliness and the scale solutions that LNG brings to the market. Then maybe we hire the PR firms.
Okay, now I think we get to the point that you have to put up your banners and give your last message to the conference. Can we start with you, Anatole, first?
As we've been talking about, I think throughout this conference, social license to operate, meaning the transparency and the quality of information that shows our commitment to the longevity of this industry and having the right emissions profile and the right environmental impact is critical to that success over the coming decades.
Kevin?
Hopefully you can read that. Sorry, I don't have a big fat pen, but it says CCS delivering cleaner LNG today and clean hydrogen tomorrow. And really my key message here is that it's my belief that technology is a solution. I think LNG is a good project. I think, product, and I think it has a long shelf life. And with CCS, we can make it a much cleaner product, and we can open the pathway to developing clean hydrogen long before I think the economics of renewable hydrogen and green hydrogen will be a viable alternative.
I think your title sounds like a title for a movie you made with Santos.
You never know.
Okay, then we go to Will.
Hopefully my bad handwriting, let's see.
You can read it for us.
Let's say this says business opportunity to decarbonize. And my message is, I think this decade, there's a commercial opportunity, and an opportunity, to generate financial return, but also really to focus on the decarbonization throughout the value chain. And we at Climate Investments, firmly focus on making commercial investments, to help the industry decarbonize with technologies and projects. But I firmly believe that this is a business opportunity for us all.
Okay. Pascal?
Yeah. So here, I think it's trying to tell also that we need to have business case. We have technologies and mature technologies, but someone has to pay for this CO2 that you want to capture within LNG or other hard-to-abate sectors. So for the large emitters, today they need maybe help and regulations, but clearly they will benefit from the carbon markets, leveraging the CCS Plus initiative, which will bring the transparency that was also claimed by Cheniere. And I think it's very true that the industry needs to have more transparency, and the carbon markets are used to develop within this transparency to have this social acceptance also that is needed.
Thank you. Kuzumi-san?
Yes. So my message here, the LNG is the bridge over to the carbon neutral society finally. Oops.
Yes, that's good.
Yeah. So the LNG is actually the solid, firm, affordable, dependable energy conversion, the systems for the future carbon neutral society. And again, we'd like to ask that the government, Japanese government to play a role of bridge over to the Asian policy makers. Because that Southeast Asian countries, such as emerging countries, is now need to grow their economy. And then for them, right now that the coal power plant is restricted. So and then they cannot afford to buy that expensive hydrogen or ammonia. So it is a good start to work on that, dependable infrastructure, such as LNG-based, energy conversion systems, and then to think of that fuel changeover to that carbon neutral in the future. That will be a more practical approach. And for that, I would like to have that government to help for bridge over to Asian policymakers. Yeah.
The Japanese government has done many ASEAN initiatives.
Right. Yeah.
This would be one of those. So our friends at METI are expert at this area, and I'm sure they can arrange it. So Nakamura-san?
Okay. Bridging solution for zero. I think shipping industries, maritime industry is now in the middle of big transition from current heavy fuel oil world to the future zero emission shipping world. I think it's the first time in 100 years, I think. 100 years ago, and the marine fuel changed from coal to oil. But now it's 100 years past. So then maybe currently LNG is the only existing and effective solution at this moment. So I believe LNG will bridge the gap between now and future. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. When Winston Churchill was the first Lord of Admiralty, he switched the British Navy from coal to oil, exactly as you said. We've come to the end of the session and we have exhausted all the time. I want to say a few words in closing. I have learned a lot. I must say that the richness of the presentation by the panelists has been overwhelming. I have not only learned a lot, but I've become a lot more optimistic, both on the cost issues, on the commitment issues, and on the technology issues. And I think with this wealth of knowledge and presentations that our panelists have shown us, we can really look forward to a very dramatic change in front of us. And a world that will make LNG beautiful, acceptable, and fully economic. And the costs would be something which would be borne easily and accepted and would be acceptable by both sides. Thank you very much for being part of this panel. And thank you very much for METI for asking me to moderate this 10th Producer Consumer Conference panel. And it was my honor to be able to be with you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much. This concludes all the sessions of this conference. Now, Sadamitsu Yuki, Director General of Oil, Gas and Mineral Resources at METI's Agency for Natural Resources and Energy, wishes to offer his closing remarks. Thank you for your introduction. I am Sadamitsu. from the Natural Resources and Bureau Department, and thank you very much for staying with us today. I'd like to thank ministers as well as representatives of the LNG leading companies for kindly sending valuable messages. Running up to today over the past 1 year, organizing committee members, IMPEX, and Sumitomo Corporation have worked so hard, and certainly on behalf of METI, I have to avail myself of this opportunity to thank them greatly. Now, this is the 10th LNG Producer Consumer Conference. Unfortunately, we have not been able to meet with each other. However, these online opportunities have offered us a chance to have very profound discussion, and I found 3 important topics which will be carried on into the next 10 years. Number 1, countries are accelerating energy transition to implement Paris Agreement in order to secure energy security and implement renewable energies. Expectations for LNG runs high. Number 2, because LNG is important, it has to be developed clean, it has to be used clean, leveraging CCS and CCUS. In gas-fired power, mixed combustion with hydrogen will become a reality in near future, and affordable hydrogen and ammonia will be manufactured from LNG and natural gas. Thus, LNG and natural gas themselves have to go through this transition in order to have greater contribution to decarbonized society. Number 3, for accelerating energy transition and clean usage of LNG, along with LNG PCC, private sector initiatives are being born, needing new form of PPP. In today's special session, Asian Natural Gas and Energy Association and International Emissions Trading Association were announced of the launch of discussions about CCS and carbon credit. This certainly signifies the new initiatives for the next 10 years required of both public and private sector in relation with LNG. I hope to see greater development of these initiatives. LNG PCC offers opportunities for high-level executives from the world in both private and public sectors. It's an open platform for discussion, which has continued for 10 years, thanks to your cooperation. The METI hopes to maintain this platform for the next 10 years for you to get together, share ideas, and communicate your initiatives. I thank all of you for staying with us to the very end. I truly hope we'll be able to see each other next year in person. Thank you very much. With this, we conclude the 10th LNG Producer Consumer Conference. Thank you very much for staying with us. And I would also like to thank the speakers of the day. There are a couple of housekeeping announcements. For this 10th LNG PCC, we received valuable messages from ministers of producing and consuming countries as well as executives of relevant LNG-relevant companies. Such messages are published on this conference's website. After the conference, you will receive an URL for the feedback survey, and your cooperation is greatly appreciated. Today's conference is archived for public view. When the archive is ready, those of you who registered for this conference will receive the information and link to that archive. With this, we conclude the 10th LNG Producer Consumer Conference. Thank you.